Marcus Davis was 27, a rising software developer who worked long hours. He was no stranger to late nights and quiet walks home through the city. But on one ordinary evening, everything he thought he knew about his life would be turned upside down. It was close to midnight, and Marcus had stayed late finishing a project. He was exhausted, and the last thing he wanted was to miss his train. To save time, he took a shortcut through a nearby park. The streets were empty, and a cold breeze brushed through the trees. As Marcus walked, he thought about calling his mom. But then he noticed something strange. Blue and red lights flickering in the distance, breaking the silence of the night. The lights were getting closer. Then, suddenly, two police officers emerged from their patrol car. They approached Marcus, eyes narrowed, flashlights cutting through the dark. One of them spoke, voice low and commanding. "Sir, we need to ask you a few questions. There's been a report of a robbery in this area, and you match the description." Marcus felt a strange mix of fear and confusion. He knew he hadn't done anything wrong. He answered politely, telling them he'd just left work, showing them his work ID. But they weren't convinced. Instead, one officer pulled out a notepad, checking off a list of vague features that barely fit Marcus. Male, tall, black, wearing a dark hoodie. "You fit the profile," the officer said. Marcus tried to stay calm, but he couldn't help feeling uneasy. Without further explanation, the officers began to search him. They found nothing suspicious, just his wallet, phone, and work keys. But that didn't stop them. Before he knew it, he was being handcuffed and led to the patrol car. The officers didn't even tell Marcus where they were taking him. The ride felt like hours. He stared out the window, his thoughts racing, wondering if this was really happening. He thought about his mother and how she'd always warned him about moments like this, telling him, "Marcus, be careful out there. People don't always see you for who you are." Finally, they arrived at the police station. Marcus was placed in a holding cell, and time became a blur. Hours passed without anyone coming to speak to him. He asked for a phone call, but his request was ignored. The cold, dim room began to close in on him, and fear took over. Every ticking second felt like an eternity. Eventually, an officer came in. He told Marcus that he was being held for questioning regarding the robbery. Marcus tried to explain again, saying he had nothing to do with it, that he'd just been walking home from work. But the officer brushed him off, barely listening. Marcus sat in that cell for hours, feeling helpless. His thoughts kept turning to his mother, his friends, his job. What would happen if this ruined everything he'd worked for? The hours dragged by, and his hope faded. But then, the unexpected happened. A young lawyer named Diane White had been following the news. She worked with a civil rights organization that monitored cases involving potential wrongful arrests. She saw Marcus's name in the reports and felt compelled to help. She arrived at the station, demanded to see Marcus, and quickly took charge. Diane reviewed the police report and immediately noticed something was wrong. The description of the real suspect was vague, but there were clear differences. The actual suspect had tattoos up his arms, and he was several inches taller than Marcus. And then she found something shocking. Footage from a nearby security camera that showed Marcus on his phone, completely alone, during the time the robbery took place. Diane was furious. She marched into the station and demanded that Marcus be released. The officers hesitated, but had no choice. After 48 tense hours, Marcus was finally free. But he wasn't just relieved. He was angry. Angry that something like this could happen, that he could be treated as a suspect simply for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Diane told Marcus that he had a right to fight back. Together, they decided to file a lawsuit against the city, holding the police accountable for their actions and pushing for change. The case became a huge story. People in the community rallied behind Marcus, sharing their own experiences of discrimination and wrongful treatment, and the city was forced to respond. But the journey was far from over. The lawsuit dragged on for nearly a year, filled with long days in court, endless questioning, and moments where Marcus thought he couldn't take it anymore. He relived that night again and again, and every time it felt like a fresh wound. But he didn't give up, and neither did Diane. She fought tirelessly, determined to prove that Marcus was innocent and that what had happened to him was unjust. Finally, after months of legal battles, they won. The city settled the case, agreeing to pay Marcus a substantial settlement. But more importantly, the police department announced that they would be implementing new training to prevent racial profiling and wrongful arrests. Marcus had done it. He had made a real difference. But the experience had changed him. He could never erase the memory of that night, of sitting alone in that cell, wondering if his life would ever be the same. Yet he knew that he had found a new purpose. He wanted to make sure no one else would have to go through what he did. Marcus became an advocate for justice, sharing his story at community events, schools, and forums. He told others, "Your voice matters. Don't let anyone take that from you." What was meant to break him had made him stronger, turning his pain into a force for change. And his story continues to inspire people, showing that even in the darkest moments, there is a light of hope if you keep fighting. And so, Marcus's journey became a beacon of resilience, courage, and the unbreakable spirit of standing up for what's right. Please like and subscribe Story Impact if you like the video.